All right, guys, welcome to one of my favorite shows to do, the Friday GPP strategy show. I did this show regularly last year and I learned a ton. My goal with this show is to bring on the best tournament players in DFS and talk more macro concepts as opposed to just very slate specific stuff. We'll obviously get into that naturally as well, but the goal of this is to be more evergreen, help us become better tournament players. And there's no one better to do this than with Erik Beimfohr, king of game theory over at Better Collective, the king of Spike Week, transitioning out of best ball, but maybe not because of NBA. How are we doing, Erik?
I wish I knew even what I'm transitioning in and out of at this point. You know, new best ball sports are dropping, but DFS is picking up. I'm trying to figure all that out. I definitely wouldn't call myself the king of game theory, but I do think you talked about right before we hopped on that like heading into last week, you didn't have a ton of like time to look at the slate and all of that. And I've kind of been actively trying to do that this week in terms of thinking about the game theory aspects of stuff. I've been trying not to like, I used to like open up the slate early in the week and like really like kind of start to play around with things. And I'm trying to put that off a little bit more and just like soak up as much information like this morning, right? I mean, Antonio Gibson isn't applicable to the Sunday slate, but like soak up those conversations and just kind of read the market, right? And so I'm doing a lot of that. And I think especially in week 2, it's going to be like, that's the most important thing. Everybody sees like the Cowboys game and all of that, but this like macro idea of overreactions, underreactions, appropriate reactions, like what does any of this stuff mean? I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think if you guys didn't see what Erik is referencing, lots of conversation going on today as for what, Antonio Gibson's role last night and whatever the trend for the couple games, what that means for him and his upside. Definitely have, the Gretchen Beimfohr side, pointing toward it being encouraging and his role kind of growing relative to last year. Then you have some guys that are still extremely worried about McKissick's involvement, yada, yada. I think as far as it relates to DFS, I think what's interesting to me is Gibson is probably in that, Derrick Henry type tier right now where he's an absolute smash when the field isn't on him because he just has that talent to erupt. But when the field's overconfident in him because he's not going to have that floor of pass catching, he becomes an easier fade. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and I don't even know that he doesn't have the floor of pass catching. I mean, I guess that's probably true, but he's a little bit more active in the passing game even than like Derrick Henry and Nick Chubb, which also speaks to exactly what you said, that if everybody is just like, oh my God, he doesn't play third downs, so I can't play him. Well, then it's like, well, I mean, he led the team in targets in week 1. Like, it's not like he doesn't get the ball in the passing game. And so if everybody's overreacting to this McKissick thing, like you said, I mean, he has some of the biggest blow up potential in the league, but he does have, more downside, obviously, than CMC, Dalvin, Kamara. So, he's in, but I think that tier after those top 3 guys is like massive. It's like everybody else, really. Some people are even trying to make the case for Joe Mixon, but I think that's a big macro thing that I'm kind of drawing away even too, is like running back is kind of just a wasteland beyond those top few guys. And I'm not sure that the market's going to, we'll get to Najee, I'm sure. I'm not sure that the market is going to treat guys like Najee maybe like they should.
Right. And I agree. I think those decision points as far as like what chalk is good to eat are much harder at wide receiver this week and potentially quarterback. But like you said, I mean, we're looking at Najee and Chris Carson as 2 of the highest owned running backs on the slate. And to me, those are like screaming red flag guys where we don't know enough about their role, about their talent, about their floor to be able to eat chalk there. To me, I'm just like crossing those guys right off my GPP list and moving on.
Yeah. And I think we saw last week too at running back specifically. I thought it was pretty fascinating that again, it's 1 week, it was week 1. People were a little more willing to move away from some of the wide receiver chalk. I think that they thought they were moving away from Marquez Callaway onto Elijah Moore, and that ended up being the gal brain play that everybody just ate the Elijah Moore chalk. But then you got like Rondale wasn't that owned, some of these other things. At wide receiver, it was a little bit more spread out. At running back, it's like everybody piled on Mostert, even people piled on Mixon, and then obviously the elite guys. I given the state of running back right now, I think that that's probably the trend that continues. Like people are just going to be like, Najee projects too well. I'm just going to eat Najee. But then maybe I'm fading the Cowboys passing game. But that's the kind of thing that I want to take advantage of, right? Like, I don't feel comfortable at all in the projection, even the floor of any of these running back. Like, I know Najee played 100% of snaps, right? Like, I get it. We've all heard it 100 times, but like, that doesn't equate to fantasy production. Look at last week. The matchup wasn't that much worse last week, and he did absolutely nothing. Like, the efficiency is a real concern. And so, those are the guys, to me, I would rather kind of, not flip the build, but I would rather think about the ideas of the popular games. Maybe, people gal-braining themselves off of the popular games. And I would rather, gal-brain myself off of the chalky running backs.
Yeah, for sure. And I was talking about this with Brian on Wednesday, and I feel like this year I know you've been very comfortable doing this kind of historically with your builds, but I even want to push myself to be even more contrarian this year. I just, like, when I look at these massive slates where we have this many teams playing, it's like, the more I really think about it, I just don't understand how you can justify eating really any chalk unless we're getting like Tony Pollard with no Zeke Elliott out for 4,200 or whatever. Like, there's some of those circumstances where I get it, but on these slates where no extreme value is opening up, or there's so many extreme values like there was last week at 3K, that it's like, just pick the lower owned one that has a similar probability of hitting.
Yeah, I think that's actually been a huge change in my game. And I think it's a little bit of how the NFL has evolved, and then like early season, the early season uncertainty. But I used to be like kind of cross off the top stack or whatever, maybe cross off the top running back or one of the top running backs. And then after that, like, it doesn't really matter. I'm just kind of, playing the best plays or whatever. Now I kind of feel like it's not that you can't get too contrarian, but we're much closer to the fact that you can't get too contrarian than just like, okay, I faded Najee so I can do whatever I want. Like, I feel like people think that, like, okay, I just need to play a little bit lower ownership or play one leverage play, and then I can just do whatever I want with the rest of my team. I kind of feel like honestly, if I have all like 1 to 5% guys in my lineup, especially like in these smaller field contests, like, I kind of want that. Like, I'm not forcing it, you know what I mean? Yeah. But I kind of want that. Leone talked about it last year, and it really rung true to me when he talked about it on one of the ETR shows. It was basically like, he got the question, can you be too contrarian? And he was basically like, no, especially in these contests, like, you're playing the spy and like, the luxury box and that kind of thing, because it gives you all these shots on goal to find that super low owned slate winner. Right. And if you're already fading chalk, so if you're fading this chalk, if you fade Najee and you fade the Cowboys or you fade the Chargers, whatever, it's like you're already fading those guys. If the chalk hits, you're dead, even if you play, a slightly higher owned guy. So now try to find the guys that's like, okay, the chalk fails, you literally win the slate. Like, the rest of your lineup, like, doesn't matter. Find the one or two guys that just completely go bonkers. The Christian Kirks of last week, right? Like 0.5%. He goes nuts, and like, you win. Like, that's it. You didn't need anything else to happen.
Yeah. And I think there's, we talk a lot about groupthink in fantasy and how we settle on chalk, but I feel like there's a new meta that was starting to emerge even last year, which is groupthink on contrarian plays. Like, we reference, Dink and Leone, they do that great show. Dink puts out his article. They do their GPP show on Saturdays. We get groupthink around the contrarian plays, and there's almost a safety in it of like, no, I'm being contrarian. Like, I got the stamp of approval. And then it's like, no, back up. This is no longer contrarian. There's a group of GPP players playing in the same contest as you that now all think this, and we basically have chalk contrarian plays.
It happens. It's happening more and like almost every week now. That's the most fascinating part of these conversations to me. Now, we had it last year. Like, there's a couple that I'll never forget. It happened a bunch. The one was it was Chiefs somebody. And they, like, you started the week and all the content you listened to or all the projections you looked at it. Like, Mahomes is, over 8K, they're like priced like last week, right there. All the big dogs are expensive on the Chiefs and I think it was the Jets week or something. Anyway,
yeah,
they're playing and everybody's like, oh, it's going to be a blowout. They're expensive. Can't do it. And the next thing you know, everybody pivots to them, and you have Cowboys. It was a Cowboys game when Dak was still playing.
Yeah.
And the Cowboys just, it was like 100 points in the Cowboys game the week before. Everybody's like, oh my God, that's the chalk. And then Dak's like 8% and CD's like 10%. And, and that's starting to happen every single week. So that's the thing that I'm like, that's why I talk about like thinking about the market constantly and just like reading Twitter, consuming content, seeing what people are talking about. That has become like the most important part of my week, because I think that like those kind of game theory conversations and those kind of game theory decisions are happening much more frequently than just people jamming the chalk.
Yeah, and like, look, I get it. People in the chat tossing out, stack options they like, everything like that. I've had to push myself away from that because just the way my brain works is I get anchored and I fall in love with the builds. I start staring at the lineup early in the week, and then it's harder for me to get away from it. To me, what was very valuable last year, and I think ties into this new meta that we're discussing, is keeping tabs on ownership throughout the week and watching it change, because that's a quantification of the overall sentiment of the DFS community. And you can kind of feel the winds in which direction they're blowing. And sometimes you can start to see, Dink and Leone hyping up Devonta Smith. He becomes the trendy. Everyone says he's the cheap rookie wide receiver you could play. And just making sure you see that number ticking up and you're not just anchored to it's Devonta Smith. He's the contrarian one. And then in the reverse side, I thought earlier in the week last year, Rondale Moore was going to be right up there with Elijah. And then all the steam with Crowder out pushed it to Elijah. And then Rondale was kind of under-owned relative to what I thought he should have been.
I totally agree. I screwed it up last week. Not in like the Rondale, the punt guys, because I mostly like avoided them in tournaments. But it was the same thing that you mentioned, but on the opposite side with Raheem Mostert. Yeah. I was on him, which was really frustrating because I was on him like all week. I mean, I guess it wouldn't have mattered regardless of what Sermon did if he got hurt. But he was one of my, quote unquote conviction plays early in the week, and I feel it's like so brutal. You feel like kind of good at watching what Elijah Mitchell did, like what the hell would Mostert have done if Mitchell's ripping off all these runs? But he got steamed up to one of the highest owned plays of the entire slate. And like, I just didn't foresee that coming. Like I expected an ownership boost, but I didn't foresee it coming to such a big extent. So that was the thing. Like, I think I screwed up where his baseline was, right? Having that baseline early in the week, like I was like, nobody's going to play Raheem Mostert. I'm going to galbrain this part-time Niners running back. Well, I think people were going to play him anyway. Like, I think people were I got that baseline wrong from early in the week, right? Like you talked about the Rondale thing. It's like, well, you thought they were going to be close enough. That ended up being wrong. Or that might have ended up being right, but then Elijah got steamed up, so it made Rondale this perfect pivot. That's kind of, again, going back to that, like I'm trying to gauge this market and kind of watch the ebbs and flows, right? Listen to all the market movers, right? See what Levitan is saying, see what Silva's saying, see what Reeves is saying, right? What are the underdog guys saying? And then obviously what's Leone and stuff, tracking all that is like I'm trying to spend like almost all my energy tracking that rather than like, I know they're looking for plays and stuff like that, but like, I mean, I could make a case for like 6 or 7 stacks like off the top of my head for this week. So that part isn't very difficult.
Right. That's always one thing I think is always interesting too, of where you're starting with your lineups, because we talk about how when we go to make our lineups on Sunday, we're going to cross a few names off. You and I are going to remove Najee and Chris Carson. We're going to move on. But then it's always like, where do you start? Because you have these puzzle pieces and people seem to have kind of different strategies. I know Leone and Blender like to think about it as what's my biggest leverage point on the slate? Maybe it's a stack, maybe it's a contrarian running back. It could be anything. But where do you find yourself once you kind of gotten rid of what you don't want to use, but you still have all of these options and directions you can go?
It's definitely starting, if possible, with like a leverage point, right? And it doesn't always have to be like the chalkiest guy, right? I don't have to play the Steelers passing game to leverage Najee if I don't think that's, because there's a combination of like upside and, projection and leverage, right? It's not just this guy's high owned, so I'm going to play the guy that's negatively correlated to him. But you kind of start looking at those. I definitely start in terms of these leverage points. So like CMC was actually one of them last week. I also got that wrong, but like CMC was like, okay, everybody's just going to GM CMC. And I really like the Panthers passing game. So that led me to this, it was a game and a stack I really liked. and then it was a leverage point. So I'm trying to combine those kinds of things, right? Like I don't really love the Steelers game that much. I guess it's reasonable, but like I don't want to play Big Ben, so it's like, okay, I start to marry up like the projection and the games environments that I like with the leverage points, right? Like if, I don't know, I haven't even looked at ownership today because I've been making fun of the people about Antonio Gibson all morning. But if like early in the week, Jamar Chase was going to be popular, right?
Yes.
If he's popular, if he's popular, it's like, okay, well, I do kind of like the Bengals, so T Higgins.
Yep.
You know what I mean? I just start like kind of collecting all those thoughts and combinations on leverage points and game environments and projections that I like. And then eventually you kind of just, like you said, I have guys crossed off and then I just start crossing more of those ones off as I go.
Yeah. And I thought, last week I was trying not to beat myself up too much of like not having any Adam Thielen because neither Justin Jefferson or Adam Thielen were going to get a ton of ownership. And then it's like, okay, you can just pick your favorite of those two. And now though, this week we probably will start to have, some overconfidence in those spots where you can play the arbitrage version in a smart way. I think let's talk about this Cowboys-Chargers game.
Sure.
It's checking basically all the boxes that people want. Amari and CeeDee Lamb, their prices are just absurd relative for their role without Michael Gallup. Dak obviously looks great. It seems like Zeke is still going to catch some ownership just because the field is wanting to buy that usage. Some interesting stuff on the Chargers side, I think, but just overall, is this like, I need to just fade this completely because of the ownership, or I want to attack this in smart ways?
I think the hard part with games like this is that there's really no leverage points. Like there's no, like sometimes you'll get one of the best examples last year, maybe one of the best examples of like all time was week 2 last year. Devontae Adams comes off like a 1,000,000-point game in week 1 and they're playing the Lions and Aaron Jones is like 10% and Devontae's like 50. It's like, well, okay, if they crush the Lions and Aaron Jones goes nuts, it's the perfect negatively correlated play to Devontae Adams. And that's what happened. The problem with this game is that everybody sees how good it is and every play is underpriced or at least like reasonably priced and every play projects well. So like somebody asked in the chat, like, what about Jared Cook as a lower owned option? I'm like, Jared Cook is going to be popular. Like, I'm not saying he's the stone cold chalk, but there is no real way. Like, I guess like Blake Jarwin or Dalton Schultz, but that's like, you're not gaining anything, with those kind of plays. And so these games end up becoming like just almost like full fades. And so I start to look for, I do, get a little bit of the hand in the dirt type of thing sometimes and just think about how can these games fail? Or maybe are they not quite, how are there ways that they are maybe not quite as good as the market thinks? Because if it really is like literally just the absolute stone cold nuts, I'm not going to just completely fade to fade. I want to have like a little bit of reasoning behind what I'm doing, like I'll talk to Gretch on Sunday morning. And if he's just like, dude, you're just find a way to play it. Like you can always find a way to play a stack if you really want to play it. So anyway, I kind of think it's reasonable to question this game a little bit as it relates to the other games. The Chargers defense is legit. They brought in Brandon Staley from the Rams, who was like the architect of one of the best. The Rams are not this uber talented defense. He made them into a really good defense. I think that there's reasons that they could actually slow down the Cowboys a little bit. I think there's reasons to believe the Cowboys do run the ball a little bit more, which doesn't even really make Zeke a play for me. It just means the game might be a little bit worse. I think people are going to play Mike Williams, and I think Trevon Diggs is like a legit corner, not to get, Davis, don't watch this, the wide receiver cornerback matchup thing, but like maybe it means nothing, but there's at least reasons to be like, okay, maybe this isn't going to be the highest scoring game on the slate. Like I'm not saying these guys are all going to score 5 points, but I think you start to stack up the ownership and maybe think about the game from an actual, like, don't just stare at the total perspective and the fact that literally there's no leverage points, that it kind of just becomes a fade for me.
Yeah. Wallace, this is why I had to put CeeDee Lamb on the thumbnail because I bet you, I don't want to speak for Eric. He can speak right here, but I will bet you Eric is plenty comfortable fading CeeDee Lamb at this ownership.
I am, but I already bet his player props. See, this is how you gotta hedge against your DFS lineups. At least I can make a little bit of money back when when my guy, one of my poster boys of the entire season goes nuts as he's going to be 1,000,000% owned.
Yeah. To me, like just looking at the ownership right now, like you said, it is very hard to find things. I would say one interesting thing would be maybe a one-off Mike Williams play. Right now, I'm not seeing him get a ton of ownership, and his role was really good. And now we're kind
Yeah.
of in that limbo period of being like, was this a fluke or what the team was saying all offseason about him playing the X in this new look offense? Could that stay? That's, I think, one of the funnest things about week 2 is just knowing like, the field isn't necessarily overreacting on some of these things. Like I see Joe Mixon's ownership at like 11%. Does not seem bad to me if this role is true where he's getting, 25 plus touches a game. So a Mike Williams one-off is vaguely interesting to me.
Yeah, and I've been bullish on Mike Williams all off season, so I can definitely get behind that. The hard part that I always struggle with, and I don't know what you think about this. It's not that I have to have every single play correlated with another play on my team, but that's ideal, right? That's what I kind of would strive for, and so it's hard. I guess you could do Zeke or something like that. I'm trying to look at ownership right now, really quick as we're talking. Zeke is not.
I see him at 20%.
Yeah, we have him like as the 5th highest owned running back, which isn't terrible. And it's possible. The other thing is like monitoring this. Like if everybody's going to play the passing game, they're not going to play Zeke. So again, another thing to kind of monitor. I just feel like I don't want to force this game when I just feel like there's probably inflated ownership on everybody, even though Mike Williams, from a raw perspective, isn't going to be super owned. It's like, well, I can just get another game. I can just find another similarly priced guy at lower ownership that correlates with my team. So that's definitely my struggle on these kinds of games.
Yeah, and one thing that adds a huge wrinkle to this game in general is it is the late slate of games. This is a 4:25 p.m. start, so you're going to have to be really careful. If you are jamming your Dak double stacks here, you need to have your pivots already planned out, because if you eat shit in the 1 p.m., you cannot roll with Dak double to Amari and CeeDee. You absolutely cannot do that. So make sure you have those lined up. And fortunately, this week, we have tons of nice games in the 4 p.m. with Arizona, the Atlanta, Tampa Bay, and Tennessee, Seattle, which, I mean, you want to talk about the pivot off that game. Fire up a Russ double stack with the Derrick Henry bring back. You're basically paying more of a premium on those as far as price tags, but like looking at that ownership, it's just a complete night and day flip relative to LAC Dallas.
Yeah, those are the two things that stuck out to me the most about the slate is just like the idea of late swap. And so that's what I'll spend, honestly. Like normally I kind of know what my plan is, like maybe Saturday evening or something like that. I don't think I'll know that this week. Well, I know that I won't know, but I will be planning all Sunday morning. We'll be figuring out those different teams to build, right? Like, because I'm probably going to be on some afternoon stack. Just looking at the slate, I'm not going to guarantee that. I do like a couple of the early games, but I'm going to have late game guys. So even on a team, like say if somebody mentioned the Bills, Dolphins, like even if you stack the Bills, Dolphins, like it's not going to be all early game guys. So all my time Sunday morning will basically be spent like, okay, if this happens, then what, right? If my stack smashes and it's low owned, right? If the Bills Dolphins game is low owned and it goes nuts. Well, like if you like CeeDee, you can just play CeeDee. But if you play that low owned team and it sucks, then you got to start looking at the leverage points or just super low owned pivots. So that's what I'll probably spend most of my Sunday doing.
Yeah. And, I think sometimes we talk about this very casually as if everyone understands it. But based on just, the data and how often people aren't late swapping, it does seem like this is still underutilized. So, I mean, just to even simplify this, Erik, I mean, just thinking about how your team is doing in the 1 p.m., if you're crushing, you can eat more chalk because you're already ahead of the field and you're almost protecting that lead. Now, I don't necessarily like that word protecting because we're still trying to get first place in these contests, but I think that works. And then if you're behind, not only are you behind, you can't then go match the field who has the same players as you with the chalk. You're literally saying, I am just waving the white flag here. You need to play someone different than them. So I think using that information to your advantage is so helpful because the entire prospect of your lineups, the entire dynamic of your team has completely changed. You have to view it through an entirely new lens after 1 p.m.
And people don't even always process that. Like people may even be understanding that they need to late swap, but then not utilizing that information appropriately, right? Like if you are stone cold dead, it's like, no, you need like a 1% guy. You need you need literally like no one is playing this or complete leverage, right? Like I said, I don't know that there's great leverage points in that Cowboys game, but if there was, maybe Blake Jarwin is. I don't know. It's not, you need to do that because you have to pass so many people, and people talk about late swap. People don't do it because they're lazy. Sometimes I'm a little lazy too, but like, you have to use that, not only like use that information, but then process it appropriately, right? And you said, you talked about protecting the lead. I agree. I still like to, kind of shoot for first, but it's like if like CD is your like gut conviction play, he's the highest projected play or whatever, and you are holding this lead, you can just play him. That also doesn't mean you have to, but but it gives you that optionality is available to you because you have this information now.
Yeah, and it's actually a 6 spot to be in. I remember talking through a few of these with Crane last year, had like a really good team going into the 4 p.m. slate, and he was still weighing a kind of a contrarian 2v2 versus a chalky one. And I would say with how top heavy so many of these prize pools are, it's still almost pushing you to be contrarian, even with a front running team, which is crazy, and kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, where it's like, when in doubt, if there's any ambiguity, go with the lower on the contrarian side. I mean, it really has to be a unique situation where you are just absolutely lapping the field, where you can kind of take your feet off the gas.
Yeah. And the other, like, I guess caveat I would put in is make sure you know the contest that you're in, because that's the other, I mean, you want to talk about gal brain shit. Like you're thinking about swaps going into the afternoon games, like in the luxury box or something like that.
Yeah.
It's 200-300 people. This week it's a $4,000 milli maker.
Wow.
So yeah, million to first 4 buy-in. And like, you're going to get to the afternoon slate, and this week it's going to be a total mind fuck, because you're like, if you have a good team, or even if you just played, like I was talking to Leone a little bit, and we were talking about, like, not to give away his goods for tomorrow, but like some sort of kind of low owned play early to gather that information, right? If you hit that 2% owned guy on the early, and then you have like all these spots available for the afternoon, like, okay, it's wheels up, now you can really start to attack these things. But you also know the sharpness of your field, right? Like in this big, like, it's all the sharps, right? And they have tons of teams. They're thinking about late swap too, right? So if you are front running that, or maybe you're chasing just a little bit, like, all these factors start to weigh in, and it's really a kind of a crazy time to be playing DFS tournaments, at least in like some of the smaller fields against like some of these, other really, really good players, because it's this total meta game where I'm not even just trying to think about what's best. I'm trying to think about what those guys are doing, and we both have 5 minutes to figure it out.
Yeah, and I do think, when we talk about how similar a lot of plays are from a probability standpoint, you should be breaking ties into having a bit of information for both the 1 p.m. and giving yourself outs for the 4 p.m. Like if you build a lineup and you're debating between guys and you have all 1 p.m. guys, like, break the tie in favor of the 4 p.m. because you can make a more informed decision.
That gathering more information, like, and that's what I tell people, and like, it makes people uncomfortable sometimes, but like, if you have 2 stacks that you like, right? You like the Bills and the Seahawks, the both those games the exact same. I'm like, what? Just play the Seahawks game, because you can see, because the flip side is also true, right? Now we're really gal-braining stuff here, but like, the flip side is also true, that you have late game guys, or you have, you're trying to see what to do with the Cowboys game, and there's a guy who's a running back early and ends up being 20%, and he goes for 40 points, and you don't have him on the early slate, right? Joe Mixon goes for, he's not 20%, but you get the point. Some guy that you don't have, that's another thing that you need to take, not even just how to attack those noon games. It's like, I had one of my biggest scores ever was a couple of years ago, and I had Marlon Mack, and he was my only early game player. And I had him against the Raiders. He scored 2 fantasy points, 2. And so I was on, it was a Rams-Bucks game back the good old Jameis days. And I just tweaked a couple of things around to make it a little bit, I stayed on that game, but I tweaked a couple of things around, and that game goes absolutely nuts. And I passed a bunch of people and finished second in a huge tournament with a 2% player who scored 2 points. But like I had that information to me. I made literally really, really minor tweaks to the afternoon to make sure I had the appropriate leverage to actually still win. And like that doesn't happen very often, but I at least gave myself a shot.
Yeah. And I think that's also an interesting thing too of thinking through late swap. And I'm actually curious how you think of it, because I know we were talking about how important correlation is. John in the chat saying he's addicted to correlation.
Yeah.
I was talking to Brian on Lowell's on Wednesday about, one of his really nice lineups had a Kansas City Chiefs double without a bring back. And I was trying to pick his brain of understanding maybe why his sim wouldn't have forced that, kind of settling on just how much unique value there was in week one, where, if you think about correlation, giving like a slight projection boost to those players involved with the correlation, it might not overrule an extreme value play. So now I'm trying to think of it through the late swap lens, because I think we talk about getting anchored to your mini correlations those 4 p.m. slates. And yet, if you're so far behind or if things have changed, how do you know when to know that the play, whether ownership or value wise, can overrule the correlation? You might just have to come off of that perfect running back wide receiver correlation.
I actually have way more of a difficult time doing foregoing the secondary correlation thing than maybe even the stack thing. So I was talking to some people this past weekend about whistles. So it's funny you mentioned Brian, because he won the luxury box, of course. When doesn't he win these tournaments? But he did the same thing, Kansas City stack with no bring back, and actually met him and picked his brain a little bit. And
Whistles?
That was basically, yeah. I met him. We went out on Sunday night.
Have you seen the Lowell's interview with him?
Yes, he is. He is. Well, first of all, I'm not going to get into a full whistles things, but he's a nice guy. He's incredibly intelligent, but he is also he is kind of crazy. But he basically, he's not giving away all the goods, but that was essentially what it was like it was a very unique slate, week one, where you have, these bringbacks don't give, you're basically factoring in a projection. I mean, these guys know it way, way better than me, right? But the correlation gives you a projection boost.
Yep.
Right. And so that, like you said, that projection boost doesn't offset the fact that we have like 33K wide receivers, and like the value was infinite, and a bunch of like even Joe Mixon, right, was free, etc. So on the secondary correlation side is where I struggle the most, because I feel like that's where all this leverage can lie, because especially when you get, I don't know, we talked about Big Ben. You get Big Ben, like I don't really want to play Big Ben, but his wide receivers could be in really, really good spots. And maybe I like somebody that's opposing the Steelers. And so it just creates these interesting leverage points where you get, like, I played Antonio Gibson, who was like reasonably owned last week. I actually thought he was going to be a little chalkier. I played Antonio Gibson, but then I played Keenan Allen on a bringback with Antonio Gibson. And it's like, I did kind of get anchored to that one, which I'm happy that I did, but those are the things that are most difficult for me to get away from, and where I struggle, like versus Brian and Whistles and all those guys, where they're, a little bit more mathematically based, figuring those things out. And I'm like hyper focused on the just theoretical leverage and the correlation.
Right, because we talk about this a lot on Lulz, this idea of not being able to handle all of these unique variables in your head. But when we aren't blessed with the analytical skills to code up this beautiful simulation ourselves, we have to run the sims for that. But I just think it makes less decisions. We know the macro trend with those secondary correlations over a long sample size is going to break in our favor. So as long as you're picking your spots and you're doing it, like you said, with good low owned ownership, that does give you leverage. I do think that is nice. And so I'm always just wondering, am I doing it as a crutch because it is less decisions for me, or is that crutch actually something I should always be leaning on?
It's funny you're bringing all these things up, because these are the exact things that I struggle with the most. Like, I don't struggle with like the general, roster construction and all that kind of thing. But like, I mean, and we understand correlation good, right? Leverage good. We understand those things, but I like the idea of anchored, like I am anchored to the benefits of those things. And I'm also anchored I'm way more anchored to the idea of getting less things right. Like, that's probably even over the benefits of correlation, the benefits of leverage and all that kind of stuff. Like, my whole goal is to get as few things right as possible, and like basically win by getting like 2 things right on a slate. That would be my dream, right? Like give me a smash running back in a game that goes off, and like, cool, I don't have to worry about anything anymore. However, like, that's just not always how things play out, right? And I'm not running a bunch of sims, and that's not, and I also don't think I want to do that. I'm really, really focused on keeping it simple for me. And so, but I do struggle with like, am I leaning on that too much as a crutch? I tend to think no, because I do think there's still a lot of people that don't lean on it enough. And so like you said, over a long sample, it's going to play out in my favor. But every slate is a micro thing, right? We're talking about macro concepts, but every slate still is micro. Like last week, I was applying all those same principles, and it might not have been right. Maybe this week it is right.
Right. Yeah, I think that is the really tough thing. And that's why it is nice to just have these things to narrow it down for us. I was feeling a little overwhelmed for week 1, both being rusty, hand building my single entry lineups, but also just having more decisions than we're used to. Like, this week, we don't have all of those cheap wide receivers to choose from. We do have chalk condensing. Like this week, I think it's going to be a lot easier to narrow down our game and player pool, or at least that's what I'm telling myself here on Friday afternoon.
It was miserable last week. I just had to just take a stand, be like, look, these were some of my kind of off the wall convictions coming into the season. And then like I talked to Gretch on Sunday morning. Like I said, he got me on Keenan Allen. Like I was like, oh, he's going to be like 0.5%. And he fits in what I'm doing. Cool. Like I tried to like almost like not overthink it last week, because it was impossible. I mean, there were like 100 awesome plays. Like you can make a case for everybody last week. And so last week, I'm kind of like writing it. I mean, maybe I'm just writing it off because I got my ass kicked, but I'm kind of just writing off last week because I think it was a pretty big outlier of a slate. This week is definitely like, there's absolutely going to be chalk condensing on specific games. And like we talked about Najee, there's definitely going to be chalk condensing even more than I thought it condensed a little more last week than I thought it was going to. But I think this week it's definitely going to be starting to get more into this, and the crazy part about that is like, we still don't know shit. Like we don't know absolutely anything, but we're already going to start to get into like the chalk condensing, like it's week 10.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing I'm going to pull up here, the initial sim right here for week 2 on Run the Sims, because this is how I've been using it for Showdown as well, is like this idea generation thing. What are the narrative and the lineup constructions we're all collectively settling on that the simulations might say, hey, not so fast here. I mean, right away, the first thing that jumps out to me is Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb showing up in, 10%, less than 10% of lineups. We know their ownership in small field could approach 30, 35%. That jumps out to me. Another thing that jumps out, you mentioned maybe liking Claypool. I don't see him here, but seeing Darren Waller up here and then a little Claypool, Darren Waller, that for some reason, that's where my brain initially went.
It goes to it. Speaking of anchored, it goes to, that's how I feel. I'm like, oh, that's the guy I was drafting in the 5th round of all these drafts, and he's going to be 1% owned. That I get that feeling too. I think it's fascinating that like Diggs, like just all the wide receivers over the Cowboys guys. I think that's really, and I don't see Keenan Allen on here. Yeah, I'm scrolling. Where's Keenan?
Yeah, where is Keenan here? Yeah, he is not popping in these much at all. So there he is, all the way down here, showing up in 7% of the total lineups. And again, I want to point out, like, the projections will be updated, ownership will be updated, like these dynamics will shift. The Sims are very fragile to these inputs, but I just think it's a really good thing to look at early on, and just to give you ideas, things you might not have considered. Like, I don't really hear many people talking about Kittle this week.
That's one game. Maybe we'll in the as we close out later, talk about some of the games. That one is absolutely fascinating to me, is the 49ers Eagles thing, with all the anarchy around the 49ers. I feel like everybody's just going to be like, fuck this, dude. I am out on this team. Obviously, Jimmy G isn't somebody you want to play. And so that's really interesting to see Kittle. But the sim thing, I think it's really useful to look. Like, I look at our projections, I look at a couple different projection sources, not to like draw conclusions, but to remind you, like you said, like especially in week 2, if you just tweak little inputs here and there, how wildly different the projections can look from tiny little shifts, right? I mean, even look here. Najee is everybody's favorite running back, and he's fourth on the running back list, in terms of, and it's a fairly distant fourth to at least the top couple of guys. So.
And isn't that an interesting thing? And I think this is instructive for how the hive mind works. Like both the field and this sim have identified Najee as a good play. And this sim is saying that he should be in winning lineups around 14% of the time. And yet the field is going to say, no, we are collectively saying he's going to be in it 30% of the time. And so that is it doesn't mean he's a bad play. The sim saying he's a good play. It's just the field's taken it too far.
Yeah. And I mean, and like, that's the crux of all that we're doing. However, you're getting to that conclusion, whether you're looking at these sims, running your own, right? You have some sort of analytical approach, or you're kind of more of just a theoretical gal brain kind of hand builder like I am. Like, that's all you're really doing is saying, okay, the market is saying Najee is going to be, 50% of the time Najee is going to be the optimal guy you need in tournaments. And I think it's 20%. So like, I want to find the guy that I think is 20%, but the field thinks he should be, 5%. Like it's almost that simple.
Yeah, I agree. In waivers, I don't even necessarily disagree with it. Maybe on the upper echelon of what they did, but I thought he was a good risk reward bet. No one's talking about Elijah Mitchell this week for DFS. I mean, he's 5,000. I'm seeing like sub 5% ownership. Who are the DFS bros right here, or are the season long bros right? I mean, it's almost like something's off here.
I was confused because when I first opened up the slate the other night, I guess it was because I had just watched you guys, and so maybe Elijah Mitchell was fresh on my mind, and so I'm like 5,000. What are we doing here? Like everybody's just going to play Mitchell and Najee and the Cowboys game. It's like easy slate, and then like you said, I start to look at ownership and projections and everything, and he doesn't project well, and he's going to be low owned, and like. This is where I've been kind of talking all week that I'm not really trying to figure out what I think is going to happen. Like I have no freaking idea what Shanahan is going to do with those running backs, but no one does. Shanahan might not know what he's going to do. But if the market thinks, like if this market that we're living in, right, this DFS market, not the season long bros, if this market is like confident that he's like, going to play 40-50% and not be really and not catch passes, right? Like that's the other thing people talk about, not catching passes. Like Mostert would catch some balls. These guys don't catch 0 balls. So anyway, if the market thinks that these guys are not valuable and like, don't project well, like the upside absolutely exists. And I do kind of like the Eagles offense. It's like this game is wildly interesting to me. And I'm kind of stunned that Elijah Mitchell is kind of being overlooked. He also might be another, like looking at the contest that you're in. If you're in the, the higher stakes stuff or even just smaller field, I think he might be really low owned, but like, kind of like we see it with James Robinson all the time. Like the guy that he keeps having good games, or the general season long bros like James Robinson. So he's higher owned in like the $5 milli, but like in the luxury box, like literally nobody plays him. And I think Mitchell might be one of those guys.
Yeah, I'm with you too on just this game in general, and talking about players who kind of, confirm things for us or, showed a new role that might be the new reality. Like we mentioned Mixon. I mean, Hurts looked awesome in week 1. And because of some of these other quarterbacks, with the Dak and the, Tom Brady and some of these guys in good spots, like Hurts might go under the radar again, and he definitely has slate-breaking QB1 upside. He led all quarterbacks in rushing, and Jared Goff just tattooed this 49ers secondary. I mean, this game is probably one of my favorites right now, just between Hurts and Mitchell.
Yeah, this game was the one that really jumped out to me. The other interesting dynamic is kind of this idea of under or overreacting. This was the Eagles game was wildly popular last week. They played the Falcons, right? Whether it be, the Falcons defense, which I thought was pretty bizarre. The Falcons defense in week 1 is super chalk, but Jalen Hurts was popular. He was a cash game. People played him in cash games. There was a, relatively minuscule ownership on Devonta Smith and Rager or whatever, but people understood them as a play. And then the Falcons were the absolute stone cold chalk, right? Kyle Pitts, Calvin Ridley. And now one game happens.
Yep.
Right. And the Eagles dominated the Falcons and were off in a much, much, much better opposing offense against them. And now we're also off the Eagles, who kind of look like they were really, really like one of the most exciting offenses in the league. It's like simultaneously in one game, we decided to overreact to like maybe the Eagles defense, but underreact to like the Eagles offense and the 49ers defense, right? Like you said, the Lions just scored 1,000,000 points and almost came back and won, but we're ignoring that against the 49ers. So I just found like it was this perfect microcosm of all the kind of things that I want to target in a game early in the season.
Yeah, and I do think it another analogy to season long is people always say, I want to avoid these situations. I literally saw tweets yesterday that was like, it's the 49ers running back. So let someone else have that headache. I'm like, that headache is where low owned, like slate breaking and league winning performances come from. If they were the obvious play, they would have gone for $1,000. They would have already been drafted. Like there's no reason that there's uncertainty and that it's a headache. So that same thing there, I think, people look at the Eagles running backs or that, Miles Sanders, Kenny Gainwell, it's like a mess. I mean, there's opportunity there. It's ownership comes from overconfidence by the field because we get the warm fuzzies inside. I know this guy's going to get the role that I want him to get.
Right. Well, there's a reason why Najee Harris had legitimately the most inefficient game like of all time. Like it's literally Reeves tweeted it out. Like he's like the only player to play every single snap and score that few fantasy points, basically. Ever. Full stop. End of like all time fantasy football. And we're just like jamming him. Right, because we're so confident in the fact that look, he's going to be out there every snap, so we're good. He's gonna bounce back. Like, what if he's just bad? What if their offense is just bad? That's absolutely a reasonable take. I mean, I don't know what the right answer is, but like he could be Trent Richardson 2.0 on a maybe even a worse offense. Like that's totally reasonable. But we're confident that he's fine. But we're not confident that Elijah Mitchell, even though he did take over everything, he played like 79% of the snaps, I think it was, but he played 80% of the snaps after Mostert goes out. We're obviously confident in this offense. We've been confident in Kittle all offseason. Now Ayuk's dinged up. Deebo Samuel was like the most target dominant player in the freaking league last week. We're not playing him. Jalen Hurts was like the most explosive quarterback in the league. Not playing him. But like there's all these situations, not only in that game though, but in other spots. Like, somebody brought up the Bills. Like we're out on the Bills now, right? One bad game and we're out on the Bills.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, note to self, jam a lot of Stephon Diggs this week. But it is funny as a thought experiment. It's like Trey Sermon gets ruled out. Mostert at, what was he, 5,800?
Yep.
Gets steamed all the way up. He was 41% in our $1,500 single entry game changer. Just an awful GPP play at that point.
I played him. Thanks for the reminder.
He
was though.
Yeah, I mean, he was an awesome GPP play before Sermon. And I do understand that was a weird thing that normally, right, those late scratches, I would have thought he got up to like 25%. Yeah. And I still didn't want to play him at that, but 41 was crazy. But anyways, Elijah Mitchell now, he is the Mostert in this offense now. Mm-hmm. He's 5,000. And we don't know what the deal is with Trey Sermon. Do we really think Trey Sermon's going to waltz in and get 15 carries after being a late scratch this week? He's 5,000, is going to come in with 38 percentage points less ownership than Mostert last week. That is exploitable.
And we know that like running backs don't matter. Like everybody, like there's a reason why people are playing Najee Harris, because we know that running backs don't matter. You just need to be on the field, and for the 49ers, we know how valuable their running backs are. So it's really, really interesting. This is, this week and the next few weeks are some of my favorite weeks because it's also not really that hard. My brain is just like wired to kind of to like challenge everything and think about the opposite side of things, which is like the perfect time for this, right? It's like, if we're in on Najee, I'm like, well, what about the reasons to be concerned? If we're out on Mitchell, and I was like, originally, I thought everybody was going to be super in on Mitchell. And so I was like having the opposite stance, like, well, guys, this is Shanahan. Like he's going to pull Roy Halou out of his back pocket or whatever, Yeah. They just signed Trenton Cannon. Trenton Cannon's going to get like 15 carries. You know what I mean? Like, and obviously I don't believe that, but I'm just pulling out the devil's advocate side of things. But now I'm like, well, nobody's going to play him. So now I'm like telling myself, well, what if he's playing every snap for this 49ers team in this game that I'm excited about?
Let's touch on a few other players that I've seen mentioned in the chat, and then we can wrap up building a lineup because that is always a good time. I will say, I saw it in the chat. Here we go. Randy's asking it. I mean, based on current ownership, it's a Derrick Henry week, right?
God. Okay, so this is a good talking point because he is the guy I struggle with the most, even when he's low owned. It's so hard. I think it's because he's expensive always.
Yeah.
That it's still so hard for me to play him. And it's definitely like an issue I have. Like trust me, I see it too. But I feel like I kind of liked him better even last week than this week. But running back is also kind of weak this week. So I totally get it. He's like the unicorn for me. Like I can't wrap my head around him, whether he's chalk, whether he's low owned or whatever. I really struggle with him. Just he's so unique. You know what I mean? Like I can even like Nick Chubb. I can see things a little bit differently with Nick Chubb in certain spots, just because he might actually catch a couple of balls and their offense is a little different. But like I just really personally struggle with Derrick Henry.
Yeah, and especially in a game like this, 54-point over-under, I hate to bring this up, but man, Jeremy McNichols now playing that Darrington Evans role we wanted. Like, that role with a talented player like Evans in a game like this, I mean, I'm not necessarily saying he would have been a DFS play just with so much, but I mean, as far as our season long and dare I say our best ball shares, it is a bummer that we don't have Darrington Evans because the team is doing what they've always done, which is not give Derrick Henry the full workload.
It's always the brutal thing, right? About DFS too. Like this, the same thing happens in any given week where like you're right, but you're wrong. You know what I mean? Like that's how I feel about that situation. It's like I'm right, I was right, but it doesn't matter. Like it's not like I'm going to make any money from it, you know. And that's what happens. That's actually what happened last week on a ton of things. Like, and I saw some year lineups and tilt space lineups and stuff. I feel really good. I felt really good. I lost every cent I put in play last week, but I feel it was like I was right about a lot of things, but just ended up wrong. And so I think if we just keep rolling that over, it'll be all right.
And I will say one kind of, you know, I'm thinking through like it seems very simple to me of like, oh my God, this Russ. Okay, ownership is condensing on Carson. This Russ double stack is expensive, but looks really, really nice when you factor in ceiling and ownership. Then you have Derrick Henry at low ownership. You have to play that game script. Titans go up early. Derrick Henry breaks off the 80-yard run to start the game. And now you have the perfect game script. Although A.J. Brown's ownership isn't necessarily high enough where you can kind of middle that game flow, right? Like you can almost have your cake and eat it too. Play A.J. Brown. He's going to be relevant in probably either game script unless the Titans get up like 14 or whatever. So that's always a tough decision too, where like if AJ Brown was 25%, be like, all right, just play Derrick Henry. But he's here at like 10, 11%. It's a little trickier, I think.
I always struggle with that. And I think that's, you probably nailed it. Why I struggle with Derrick Henry is because I'm so focused on correlation. And then I'm so focused on finding these like, you know, blow up games or whatever. I actually really tend to not include my running backs in like my main stack. Whether it be, you know, I'm definitely not playing Tannehill with Henry, which I guess some people disagree with, but that's not for me. And even on when I'm playing the Russ, like double stack, what I really want in my stack, I know Henry again is unique. And I've been wrong having this kind of as a rule in the past plenty, but like, I kind of want this like back, forth. And like that typically comes from a lot of passing, right? Like look at the Bucks-Cowboys game. Shoot, look at the Ravens game. The Raiders, Derek Carr's throwing it 60 times. Lamar's running all over the place, throwing to Hollywood and all that kind of stuff. Like I want this back and forth, and that typically comes through the air. Even though Derrick Henry is this unicorn, I just typically look for like maybe a little bit more secondary correlations with like if Derrick Henry is really feasting, you know, 203 or whatever, they are still going to control the clock quite a bit. So it's really hard for Russ to, you know, especially for the double stack, for Russ to get there. But like one of the receivers with Derrick Henry, it's like, okay, if Seattle is chasing, like Metcalf can catch 2 long touchdowns. You know what I mean? But I'm not sure that game environment ends up being the nut game environment of the week.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I'm with you too. I think it's like, it's so hard to project game scripts too. And like, you do really need a specific game script for a Derrick Henry, you know, in the Seattle stack to hit. And that might be a little bit too narrow of a threat, although I'm going to keep my eye on it based on the Henry ownership. Let's talk about one more, apparently breaking news in the chat. Anthony Schwartz. Wait, now I saw multiple people say Schwartz out. Is he out or not?
No, I was just looking it up. A beat for the Browns mistweeted.
He missed it.
He meant Anthony Walker which is a linebacker for the Browns, not Anthony Schwartz, which is a fairly I'm glad he corrected himself, because that's a fairly significant difference for us.
Yeah. Hey, who among us haven't mistweeted at one point?
I do it every day. Yeah.
It is funny, just like us DFS player, everyone's like adjusting their projections off of like one random tweet. I was going to say, maybe let's just talk about that game real quick, because it's one that is kind of interesting, just considering how well the Texans played and if they could potentially push the Browns similarly to, you know, what the Chiefs were able to do. Obviously, the Texans are not the Chiefs, but kind of encouraging there. How are you feeling about these? Obviously, the Browns running backs are always an interesting decision. I mean, Nick Chubb really priced up and will probably catch some ownership. Kareem Hunt, though, down there, I don't think is going to be owned at all, really, at 5,800. He looked pretty good. How are you thinking about the Browns without Odell?
Another situation that I really struggle with, because I'm kind of holding to my priors on the Texans, where like I think maybe the Texans are still really, really bad. It's just the Jags are also really, really, really bad. And I've been on, like, I'm high on the Browns. I get it with like basically any Browns play. Like, I get it. I just really struggle with kind of, we talked about, you know, I'm not going to stack up the Browns personally. There's too many other spots. You know, I'm not playing a Baker double stack with a Brandon Cooks bring back or something. That's just not for me this week. But like, I definitely see it with like Chubb too and Hunt. It's just, you start to narrow down that list and it's like, okay, you know, I know that the Browns are going to score, but like, the bringbacks are brutal, you know, Brandon Cooks, Anthony Schwartz, DPJ, you know, they played 3 tight ends. The bringbacks are really brutal. And so I'm willing to miss out. Basically, my premise is I'm willing to miss out like on good games when these types of plays like don't really fit well into my lineups. And like, I mean, maybe you like Chubb and Cooks more than I do as a you know, a secondary correlation or something. But it's hard for those guys to make my list.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, Chubb is, you know, again, similar to the Henry thing, like when you can get him in nice spots, when he's sub, you know, 5% or whatever, I don't mind it. I'm seeing his ownership right now around 12%, and he's priced up. I mean, at 7,800, and you just, again, talk about, I'm actually surprised his ownership won't be higher, just because it's like Nick Chubb looks so good. Everyone's ready to pick on the Texans. No Odell. You got to think they're just running all the time. I could actually see that ownership ticking up a little bit.
I think so. I think so too. And I think well, Schwartz is in now. Like if Schwartz was out, we would have been having a very different conversation where people would start talking themselves into DPJ and Landry and then maybe Hunt would have got a boost. You're right. Obviously, we don't need to talk about that now, but it could have been a different situation.
Yeah. No love for Landry. I mean, it's similar to like with the season long stuff where I don't know, I think you can get similar type of production a little cheaper or in better spots, or there's other wide receivers in his range that just have access to a much higher ceiling. But I don't necessarily think he's a bad play, especially if you're finding some correlation with it.
I mean, the issue is that, at least on DraftKings, which is where I play mostly, like, I know that these guys are popular and we want to play lower owned plays, but like the Dallas guys are like the same price as Jarvis Landry. Cooper Kupp is cheaper than Jarvis Landry. Keenan Allen is not much more than Jarvis Landry. Like, I'm like, Jamar Chase is like 1,500 less than Jarvis Landry. It's like, yes, I'm all for game theory. I'm all for ownership and leverage and all that kind of stuff. But like, you do still have to have the upside, you know, to win a tournament relative to the slate, right? I'm not saying Jarvis Landry doesn't have upside, but like, we're talking about a range of like 10 guys that are just like pretty awesome plays, and to fade all of them, I want it to be for, you know, like you mentioned Diggs. Like I would like to play Diggs if I'm going to play a lower owned leverage play than Jarvis Landry.
Yeah, and we talk about the game script stuff as well. I mean, the Browns are 12.5 point favorites too. So and we know their identity is running the ball. I would be way more into Landry if this was, you know, not as big of a spread and we thought they were going to be passing some more.
Yeah, I mean, if it was the Chiefs, if we knew coming into this week, you know, it's Chiefs again, and Odell was out, like we'd be having a different conversation, right? You know, he makes for a bring back or whatever, but not this week for me.
For sure. All right, we'll wrap up here building a smart tournament lineup. You'll notice here I do have the weekly listener league going for the Deposit Kingdom Discord. It did fill up 200 of 200. I got to talk to DraftKings. I mean, if FanDuel can give the Swolecast a listener league, I mean, they're 15 minutes down the road from me, Eric. But they don't care about me, do they? They're cashing their NFT and sports betting checks.
They don't. They are an NFT and sports betting business now. They don't care about us DFS, and they certainly don't care about us best ball peons. I know we're not allowed to talk about best ball, but they launched a week 2 contest. Here's how little they care about the money and the overlay and everything. They launched a contest on like Tuesday, so it's like 2 days to fill a week 2 best ball contest. Obviously, had to be drafted by last night. It's like 8,500 entries. I think it got to 4,000. Like, I think it got to 4,000 and entries. Like, they don't care. They don't care about any of this stuff. They're just printing money.
It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. I'll do my best, guys. They do cap you for your own created leagues at 200. Yeah. We'll see what we can do. All right, let's you have the honors. Let's start off with a stack or a correlation, something you like to get us started here.
The play that has jumped out the most to me, like, all week is a stack. And it is Jalen Hurts to Devonta Smith.
Love it. Yep. Smith looked really good. It doesn't seem like he's going to catch a ton of ownership right now. I'm seeing him at what, 3%? I mean, after that performance, I guess just because he's priced up now, but that makes a ton of sense to me. And I'll go ahead. I was hyping him up. We'll do Mitchell in here.
I love it. I think the other interesting thing about this game is it's not expensive. So, like, and it's early. We talked about doing the early game thing. Like, if you just play, even like, and you can single stack Hurts, right? So you're not even using up a ton of roster spots. It's great value to get whatever you want in the afternoon, and you get to kind of take a peek, right, and see how this goes and see where you stand going into the afternoon. The only other thing, like, that I did just want to point out about this game is, like, you talked about the Lions, like, marching back and scoring at will on the 49ers, which was wild to me. But, like, they've continued to get more banged up. They've lost multiple starters. Robert Saleh's gone. I don't know if that matters as a defensive coordinator, but I think there's reasons to believe, like, the Niners defense just might not be very good. And the market doesn't care about that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So pick back to you. I'm curious here. Obviously, Jalen Hurts, fully justifiable to single stack. Would you consider any double stack options here?
See, I really like him as a single, just because, like, when he wins the slate for you, it's like 100 rushing yards and a touchdown. And he was well on his way to that last week. If the Falcons were competent at all, I think Jalen Hurts might have done the Kyler Murray, Patrick Mahomes type of 35 to 40 point game. It's just the other team couldn't stay in it. And the Niners are going to score points. So I'm not concerned about that. So it'd be a single. Yeah.
That makes sense to me. All right. Pick back to you here.
What I'm really fascinated by is this kind of mid-tier of running back ownership. What do you have between all non-Najee? I mean, I think we expect Najee to be the most popular, but on Roto-Grinders, we have Eckler, then Carson, then Henderson as, like, kind of and then Zeke as a top 5. Is that what you have?
Yeah, I'm seeing Najee, Carson, Zeke, David Montgomery, and Henderson.
Yeah. David Montgomery. Jesus, what are we doing? All right. So then I got a guy I want to set up for a secondary correlation that gives us some savings at running back, and I'll let you pick the secondary correlation. But Chase Edmonds.
Ooh, love it.
I think we're making a big stink about his goal line role, and I get that, but he's not going to not score a touchdown this year. Like, he's going to score touchdowns. We're excited about that offense. He is the passing down back, which obviously for DraftKings is amazing. And Connor was actually just kind of like closing out that game. I thought Edmonds I was really excited for the way they used Edmonds last week. So I'm pretty excited for him.
I'm with you too. And I feel like, this, and I'm not even convinced necessarily that, like, Nuke is just going to always be, like, the absolute guy and then everyone else is going to cycle through him. I think this offense can support 2, massive performances each week, and they're going to cycle through Rondell, Nuke, Edmonds, all these guys I think have massive spike week games in them. I love that. And so I'll just bring it back with Jefferson. People, if they feel like they got burned last week, if people want to chase Thielen there, I mean, we know Jefferson's the stud. Do you have anyone else that you would entertain for the secondary that I'm not like an Osborne or something? I'm
not. I don't know if I restarted my podcast with Blender. I'm back on with Blender we're doing it Mondays now on the Theory of DFS podcast. And he's such a sicko. That was like the first name he brought up in terms of like, how are people going to react to KJ Osborne? I'm like, they're not going to fucking react to KJ Osborne, dude. Like, you need to watch a little bit of football every once in a while.
Play whoever you want. KJ Osborne. It doesn't matter. Okay. I got Jefferson, and it's back to you.
Oh, this is where it gets tough. So I think I want to do, oh man. All right, I'm doing it. Kyle Pitts.
Okay. All right. Yeah. We haven't talked about him yet. You did book a bet with the ship chasing fellas, Pitts versus Hawkins. I actually think it's a pretty close bet, but talk about Pitts in this spot.
Yeah. And and to be clear to the ship chasing chat, like I'm bullish on Hawkinson. I actually wish like early in the offseason, I wasn't drafting Hawkinson, and like you guys and some other people got me on to Hawkinson. And so like, those are like two of my most leveraged tight ends is Pitts and Hawkinson. So like, Hawkinson doing well is also good for me. But I think it's just that I'm really, really monitoring Pitt's ownership. Like his situation is the spot where I feel like, obviously he was like the highest owned player of the slate last week. The Falcons were maybe aside from the Packers, the biggest train wreck of the entire year. But 10 days ago, we were excited. We were excited for Arthur, right? There's all the Arthur Smith hype. Kyle Pitts is this generational prospect. Calvin Ridley was like a 1-2 turn pick in season-long drafts. Some crazy people were drafting Russell Gage. Like there was all this excitement over this team, right? Mike Davis, we've done the Mike Davis thing. Like there's all this excitement over this team, and one bad game, and it was bad. I get it. One bad game, and it's like, nope. Like the Falcons defense was chalk last week. Dude, they were like the chalkiest team of week one. And now we're just out on them. And I get the matchup is bad. But like from a market share perspective, usage, all that kind of stuff, everybody looks how you want them to look. Even, Mike Davis, Calvin Ridley, they look how you want them to look. They were just really, really bad. And sometimes, the Bucks lost in week one last year. I think it was the Ravens beat the Browns by like 30 points in week one last year. Malcolm Brown was the highest scoring running back of week, like the second highest scoring running back of week one last year. I just am trying to find those spots where I think like everything looks fine. It's just the market's like, oh, nope, I'm out on this guy now.
Yeah. I'm with you. I think he's a very interesting play, especially if this ownership holds at sub 5%. Most of my concerns were less about Kyle Pitts and just more about how awful and conservative this offense looked. But his role was good. And if Vegas is right and they're, losing by 2 touchdowns the whole game, I mean, God help us, Arthur Smith. Like you better start just chucking the rock. No more Mike Davis carries on 3rd and 9. Okay. Do we have money? Can we make Steph Diggs work? I think we can probably make it work.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah.
Let's get Diggs in there. And I'll just put a placeholder. I'm just going to put a 2,500. Didn't even think about it, but just to see what we're working with here.
How much is Waddle?
That's a good question. Yep.
45.
So no Will Fuller this week. Talk through, like how you would think about a Waddle versus Parker in this situation.
Yeah. It's definitely Waddle for me. I thought he looked awesome. He might have looked the best, him and Devonta Smith out of all the rookie wide receivers, which is really funny. We look back and we were excited for Rondale and we were excited for, Elijah and all that. And then the two guys who went highest, Waddle and Devonta Smith, are the guys that like looked by far the best. Like shocker, I don't know why we were surprised by that, but I'm still, some people are shaky on Tua. I'm still bullish on Tua, and with Fuller out now, I also want to be attacking this Bills, again, to get my hand in the dirt. I really like to attack this Bills defense over the middle. And I think that's where Waddle will spend a lot of his time operating in the slot. Again, Davis earmuffs, Tre'Davious White is on the outside, which I'm not like totally afraid of, but Devontae Parker also isn't the kind of guy where I'm like, oh yeah, matchup doesn't, he's not DK Metcalf, it's not like matchup doesn't matter for him. And Waddle, I just think is the explosive upside bet. And if the if the Bills are really ripping it up and hitting some home run plays, like, I mean, if you get a bunch of targets to Waddle, I mean, he might be one of the higher upside guys, maybe the highest upside guy under 5K this week.
Yeah, I agree completely. As we wrap this up here, I'm curious because a lot of so based on just current ownership, this is a very contrarian lineup. Basically not eating anything over 10% that I'm noticing right now. How do you think about, let's just say this ownership holds and we don't get the Pete and Beimfohr bump on it after making this team here. When we're looking at the 4 p.m. slate, we talked about late swap stuff. So we have that Edmonds-Jefferson correlation. This is kind of the spot I found myself in last week where I already had CH and Aaron Jones in my lineup. So I'm like, I'm already contrarian. I don't have anything to do. Would how this team performs early change how you think about that late mini correlation?
That's a great question. It is an interesting salary amount that's left. Jefferson and Edmonds can get you to some combination of that, like probably that Eckler, Dallas.
Ceedee?
Yeah, Eckler, Ceedee, Zeke, Keenan, or even, Carson, AJ Brown, whatever. So anyway, what I would really think about is I would play a late game defense.
Yes.
In this team to make sure that I had that little bit of extra flexibility. And if you end up playing something that's cheaper than what we have, you can go up to a more elite defense if you would prefer it. So yeah, like, I mean, the Chargers is not very fun, but you know what I mean? Like, I'm plugging in something like that. Honestly, the Chargers might not be the worst. It's kind of an interesting defensive play, actually, with the amount that Cowboys are going to pass and some of the offensive line issues they have. But point being, I would, I'd be happy to stick to this. But if you literally hit the stone cold nuts and you just want to play some combination that is right, your favorite play is Eckler, Ceedee, but we were playing this Edmonds Jefferson thing for kind of some leverage. Like, just play the Ceedee side of things. I tend to, like you said, play it a little bit looser and a little bit wilder, where I would still like to stick to Edmonds and Jefferson, but you get to make that decision later. You know what I mean? You get so much information heading into the afternoon with this specific lineup that, like, your options are pretty much endless. You can do, like, Chargers is in here, right? Chargers defense is leverage.
Yep.
So you have all these options.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the biggest, I think, helpful things. If people are just like, hey, I have $800 extra to spend. Why would I play the Chargers? But like that 800, when we know the variance for defensive scoring, that 800 is worth its gold in flexibility based on what it's going to allow you to do and unlocking more of those 2v2 combos. So I think that's a really sharp way to think about this lineup and to kind of think through your options, because you like your other correlations, right? You're rocking with your Philly stack, you're rocking with your Kyle Pitts one-off, your Buffalo, Miami, and you're going to have a lot of information and then a ton of flexibility with those last 3 slots based on what happened.
Yeah, and I do think somebody brought up in chat, like, understand not wanting to double stack with Hurts, but Goddard could be interesting with the Ertz injury. I think that's totally fair. My general preference is kind of single stacking guys like Hurts, but I'm totally open to it too. Like you said, if we'll have a different discussion on Sunday if Ertz is actually out, or we get word that he's limited or whatever.
Yeah. And one final thing, just to circle back, historical anomalies, understand not wanting the double stack with Hurts, but Goddard could be interesting at 2.7% ownership. Yeah, and I think I'm going to guess what Eric would say would be just play Goddard as the single stack and then go somewhere else with a one-off with Smith in this case. Right.
Get Goddard has the 100-yard and 2-touchdown game, and not, if Goddard has 100 yards and 2 touchdowns and Hurts throws for 300 and runs for 100, one of those other receivers could be okay. But I think it's a little bit unlikely. But again, double stacking is good. I love the majority of my teams are double stacks, but I would just be open to single stacking Jalen Hurts, especially then when we talk about the flexibility type stuff. Like, keeping that in your back pocket is also important. And like when you might be giving up a fair bit of projection and upside, double stacking a guy like Hurts, which I don't know that you are, but it's possible.
Yeah.
If you're sacrificing that flexibility on a slate like Sunday, I would lean to the single then.
Yep. And then you can, like, this is the fun thing. If you do have a really narrow core and you're playing, like, you could run this, you could swap out Mitchell for Debo as like your bring back, and then kind of do something else there at running back at RB2. Like, if you're really heavy on a specific angle, but are like, look, I don't want to have to guess if it's Thielen or Jefferson. I don't want to have to guess if it's Goddard or Smith. I mean, play it both ways. I think is a very good way to handle it. Erik, what kind of, I've been so busy. Are you writing your weekly GPP article? Cause I love that one last year.
I haven't started it. I'm trying to get through this best ball.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Time. Like I just don't have, I am writing the showdown slate IQs for Thursday and Monday. Somebody else is taking them over for Sundays just because Sundays are kind of hectic. So I am still doing the showdown slate IQs. I am still doing my conviction plays in lineup HQ on Roto Grinders. And I think I'm doing expert survey. I didn't do it last week. So I'm not really positive. I am hoping to get to that tournament article. It's just, Underdog and these sites did not do me any favors by launching all these other best ball contests like immediately after the NFL season started. So I'm just trying to, if you are playing best ball, I'm cranking out a bunch of stuff on spikeweek.com. Best ball season is apparently nowhere near over. So I'm still working on a ton of that stuff. But yeah, all my DFS stuff at Roto Grinders. And I'm hoping to get to a little bit more kind of as the season goes on.
Awesome. Yeah, I think we're all kind of working our way out of season-long best ball mode. Best ball mode's never going to end for Erik, but we do have to orient ourselves to DFS. I think this was a good show and another good kind of primer of how to be thinking about these contests. I mean, I think both Erik and I are similar, Leone similar. We're not playing a lot of large field. I think this is the way to really think about your small field and your single entry 3 max type contest. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I will be running back this show every Friday at noon with another smart GPP player. Also, a little plug, I'll be back on the air here at 2:30 p.m. Eastern for Splash Play. We're having Pat Corain, my fellow ship chaser, on. We'll be running through all the games, giving some hot takes, our ride or die picks. So I'll see you guys then. Please follow Erik on Twitter. Check him out. Hop in the Spike Week Discord if you're looking to get some of that mid-season, best ball fix. And of course, if you want access to all the tools at Run the Sims, you want to run those simulations, you want to look at projections, ownership, get ideas for your lineups, that's the best way to do it. Promo code Pete gets you 10% off and get you access to the private channel in the Discord. That is it for me. Thank you to Erik. We'll see you at 2:30.